Hello, and welcome to the Christian Reeve Podcast. This is the 2-year anniversary of the show. Wow, that feels good to say that. It's a 2-year anniversary episode. It's just me. So if you were here for a guest, sorry to disappoint. But it's been a while since I did one of these episodes. And I like to try, I guess, to keep them for special occasions, or if I've got a really clear kind of topic in mind. I say this same spiel every time I do a discussion episode. Hopefully one day I'll do more, that would be excellent. But for now, let's just live in this moment. This is the 2-year anniversary of the show. I'm recording this early ahead of time. It's not actually the day of, or at least it isn't for me. It will be for you, but it won't be for me. And sorry to break the illusion there. Sometimes you have to record these things ahead of time. I did actually want to do it on the day, but I actually find myself way too busy right now to be able to commit to that. And that's kind of a good thing. And kind of what I wanted to lead with, at least in this episode, just to start things off. 2 years of doing the show. What's changed? What have I learned? How are things developing? Where are we at right now? Well, I can tell you now, there has been an influx of guests in, I would say, the last year, but especially the last 6 months. And from what I've understood, a lot of that is down to the fact that people are beginning to see my show, at least from a professional standpoint. And I think they're kind of looking at that like, okay, maybe this is a show that I might benefit from going on, or I might have a good conversation here, or this person might be able to do a good interview for me, whatever the motivations may be. And sometimes people share them, sometimes they don't. But I've been very lucky in the guests that I've had so far and the opportunities I've had to just have a range of wonderful people on the show. And, it's still going. And I think, there's a couple of points I really want to touch on in this episode. And I think one of the biggest is the fact that, when it comes to podcasting, you do need to be consistent. You do need to keep going. My apologies. You can't give up. You have to remember why you started. And I've had ups and downs and everything, both in my life and with podcasting. And one of the things that kind of keeps me going is this idea that, every chance to do the podcast is another opportunity to learn something new, to reach more people, to interview someone amazing, or to explore a topic that I've not explored before. There's various different motivations behind it, but increasingly, the more and more I do it, the more interesting it becomes and the more motivated I become for doing it. And I don't know, it's my apologies if I ramble. I'll try to kind of bring it back every now and again. And that's something I've really paid attention to doing, and certainly in the last year with my podcasts. But this episode, I don't know, there's a lot of ground to cover. And I suppose I'm still a bit bewildered by the fact that we've reached 2 years. Because when I look back at the podcast and I look back to the very beginning, I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I thought it was just going to be originally, funnily enough, just a discussion podcast where I'd just tackle a topic each week or every 2 weeks or whatever the case may be. But then, I had some people reach out that wanted to appear on the show. And I was like, right, well, let's roll with this. Let's do this. And it's kind of just escalated from there. Sometimes I reach out to people. Sometimes people reach out to me. Sometimes people recommend the show to others, and then they get in touch with me. Or there's lots of different ways that people come on the show, but the most important thing is that we're reaching people. We're getting to people. We're reaching people around the world who are wanting to appear on the show and wanting to share their stories and, just appear on the show, which to me is very flattering because I'm just a guy, I'm 29 as of recording, a guy with big dreams, I'm an aspiring actor, an aspiring voice actor. I suppose in some ways I'm an aspiring podcaster, at least in the sense that I'd love to be able to make money from this. And believe me, I've tried to unsuccessfully, but I mean, I love doing this show. I would do it even if I never make money from it, because there's something about podcasting that's different from everything else that I do in life. I think, and increasingly, and certainly in the last 6 months, this has become more and more apparent, is this kind of motivation to, as I mentioned before, meet new people and learn from them. I can't count how many episodes I've done more recently where I get off the meeting, I sit down, and I just take 5 minutes to just kind of take it all in and realize how lucky I've been to have that opportunity to speak to that person, to be in that moment and learn from that. And I think one of the most motivating aspects to that, in addition to that, is I'm so bad at speaking right now today. Sunday, fun day kind of mindset. I'm like, ooh. It's that people have been reciprocating that. My guests, more often than not, will come off the show saying like, thank you. That was a really good conversation. Excuse me. That was a really good conversation. And I really got something from that, or I was inspired by that, or, I really just enjoyed being here and doing this. And it means the world to hear people coming off the show and feeling that way. And, there's been times throughout the last 2 years and even more recently where, I've been frustrated at the fact that, the show hasn't kind of grown more than I'd like it to, reached more people than I would have liked to have. But when I look at things like the amount of guests I've been able to have on the show and the fact that it's been a steady flow of guests and it keeps going, and, we've reached 2 years now, that is a form of success. And that's to be something to be celebrated. And that's what this episode is. This is a celebration of getting to 2 years, not giving up, not giving into, those negative feelings of like, oh, why isn't this where I want it to be? Why isn't this where I want it to be? Well, there's a lot of things in my life that aren't where I'd like them to be, as I'm sure many of the people listening to this or watching this, if indeed I do have a video version, hope I will. I am recording. Hopefully people will continue to get something out of this podcast as much as I do. And hopefully that will continue to go on. The show will continue to go on, because I really enjoy doing this podcast, interviewing these people. I feel like in the last, again, it really feels like maybe it's just 2022, tail end of 2021. I feel like I've kind of come more into my own as it pertains to podcasting, because, when I first started this, it was just, let's just do interviews. Let's just see what we can get out of this and try and figure it out as we go. And for a while, I thought I had it kind of figured out, but it was always difficult to market the podcast. Like when people ask me, I still struggle to this day sometimes to be able to say like, well, what is it? What is this podcast? What is it trying to achieve? And I think I've finally figured it out. I think this podcast is all about sharing life stories. Sometimes the episodes will be a bit more straightforward. You have a guest on and maybe you just cover their life in a very basic way. say if they're a musician, well, this is the type of music they're doing. This is how they think about it. This is where they're from. This is how they got started, etc. You're going to have those episodes. But I always try to make my guests feel as comfortable as possible and try to get them to open up. And once they do, that I feel is where the best conversations are had. When you can share a story and kind of delve into who that person is, at their deepest level. Because I feel like in life, that's often the most interesting conversations you'll have with the person, is when you get to the real deep stuff. Not to say that every episode is super deep, but that's what I try to aim for. That's what I try to go for. Because I want to show people who that person is and what they're about, and not just kind of ask the basic questions. And don't get me wrong, like sometimes I will be asking those questions, but that's what I'm aiming for. For example, and I've said this before, but I might as well reiterate now. Every show, every time I do an interview, I have a sheet of questions there with me. And, they're all centered on my research around that person, what I could find, what came to mind. I try to write as many questions as I can down on the paper so that I have, something prepared. And, I do have like a basic piece of paper that I never use, but it's like a generic kind of podcast questions that I either have seen on other shows, or sometimes they spring to mind, or, whatever. And that's like the backup to the backup, because the questions I have in front of me are the backup. I will use them just to kind of get this conversation started. But then from there on, I try not to use it, if at all, because what I'm aiming to do is just have a conversation with that person and essentially just like create questions on the fly, create follow-up questions. I sit and I try to be there in that moment with that person, listen to their story and think, okay, what would people want to hear? What do I want to hear? What do I want to know? That's what I try to aim for. It's also another reason why I don't edit this podcast. I like it to feel natural. I like it to feel like a casual conversation that you're listening to. It's also because I'm too lazy to edit. Even though I do edit the podcast, it's very little. I do the podcast clips. Obviously, I clip it up in the sense that, edit anything out that needs to be edited out, and then, upload it everywhere. And that's kind of it. And I try to keep it as simple as possible. But, I've had people ask me that before, like, why don't you cut out the ums and the ahs and all that stuff? I think it feels more natural. I like it. It's like, this is the conversation as it was, because real conversations are like that. You're not thinking of things every 5 seconds. Sometimes you do pause and consider a question. Obviously, it's different for me being the host, because I have to kind of keep the conversation going. And it's even more of a challenge with an episode like this, where it's just me here in my room talking to you, essentially talking to myself. It kind of reminds me of when I started creating videos for YouTube back in 2019. And hello, loud bike that's ruining my podcast. I live right next to a main road, so it just ruins any kind of recordings that I'm doing. But oh well. One day it won't be like this. One day I'll have a soundproof room and I'll make as much noise as I want. One day. I often find myself saying that. One day, I will have everything that I want. And still, it won't be enough. No, I'm joking. Oh, man, do you know what? If you can enjoy your own company and enjoy what you're doing, then, wow. I think that's a good start, isn't it? I don't know. I'm rambling at this point. I'm losing track of things. Let's bring it back to the basics of what this episode is. I'm very happy that I've had so many guests on the show, and that I'm continuing to have a steady flow of guests. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you to everybody that's appeared on the show throughout the last 2 years. It's been a pleasure having all of you on the show. You're more than welcome back on the show. Some guests I've had repeatedly as well on the show, and I love that too. I want to just keep this show going. I kind of want the show to grow with me, and I feel like in many ways it has, because I've grown with this show. When I first started, I wasn't sure of myself. You know, where was I? It was 2020. I'd just gotten off the back of another podcast I was doing, very short-lived one. But I was doing that with two other people, so there was a little less pressure there. But then there's loads of pressure once I started doing this. And, you know, I made it even more difficult because I didn't really have like a set idea for what this show was or what the identity was. That I figured out throughout sort of doing this show. As I mentioned before, it's just kind of in the last year or so that I've really figured out what the show actually is. But it's always changing, and I'm always changing, because that's just life, isn't it? You change as you get older. You learn things, you tweak things. I think this show has helped me to become a better conversationist. It certainly made me a better listener, which is such an important conversational skill, is the ability to listen and take on board what the other person is saying, and, you know, not just wait for your turn to speak, but really just hear what they're saying and hear the intent as well, not just the words, but the intent of what they're saying. A lot of the reason why I'm able to come up with questions on the fly is because I'm there in the moment with that person, in like taking on board what they're saying, but I'm sort of losing myself in what they're saying. I'm losing myself in conversation. It's no different to having a conversation in real life for me. The only difference is that I am consciously aware of the fact that I am hosting a show, and I do kind of need to go from topic to topic and have some sort of, I don't know, flow, I suppose. Because I'm thinking about you, the listeners. I'm thinking like, how does this sound to you? Does it sound like one big rambling mess, or is it something that's followable, if that's even a word? Something you can follow easily, and, you know, you can have on while you're doing your cleaning or going to work or at the gym or however you listen to the podcast. You know, I want it to be something that's easy to follow and not frustrating to listen to. But there's many goals with this show. And that brings me to probably the most important thing, which is the people listening to the show. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast, for supporting me, for all the comments you leave that are supportive, that are constructive, that, you know, where you ask me questions, or where you simply tell me that you enjoyed the show, or, you know, that got you through a hard time or inspired you. Like, that means the world to me, because it means that there's like a point to doing this other than my own kind of convictions, or is that the right word? I don't know. Motivations is a better word. I think that's the right word for doing this show. But particularly when I've had those moments where I've been really downtrodden with how things have been in a particular week, like maybe I release an episode and it doesn't get seen for ages, and I'm just like, oh, what's the point, you know? But then finally someone sees it and they leave a comment, and it just straight away just motivates me again. I'm like, yeah, that's why I do this, for these people, these few people that are listening. I do it for them as much as I do it for myself. I do it for them too. And yeah, that just keeps me going, and that keeps me motivated. So a massive shout out to everybody that listens to this show. Thank you so much. And massive shout out to regular follower and listener of the show. She's part of my community. Shout out to Vilma. Thank you so much for listening to the show for so long. And I see all of your comments. Of course, I try to reply to them all the time. And ahead of this show, which I wouldn't have even done this show had it not been for Vilma, because the last time the last few times that I'd reached out and advertised on social media, like, hey, I'm doing an anniversary show, or I'm doing a special episode, and, you know, I need people to send in their questions or something like that. And I never really got a response to that. And I got a bit demotivated by that. And in a recent live stream, Vilma was there, and she's an avid supporter of everything that I do. So thank you so much, Vilma. She kept pushing doing this show. And I said, with the greatest respect, like, what's the point? I've tried this before and it's not worked. And I've tried it several times. And it's like, my mindset has always been like, if you don't have a big enough following, a dedicated following with people interacting with you, then, you know, most people, I mean, that if you keep asking them and nothing's happening, then they're just not interested. Or perhaps, you know, there's a lot of things on social media. And I'm not really referring to people who listen to the show, because, to be fair, I don't know how many regular listeners there are. There's at least 2 I know for definite. So that includes Vilma, and I think there's another lady who follows the show. Her name escapes me right now, but she comments quite frequently on YouTube. And then there's a lot of other people in my community who sort of catch in here and there. And I thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. I know podcasts aren't everyone's cup of tea. They are very long form, you know, type of content, and I suppose most people prefer short form these days. So, you know, maybe podcasting is a dying art. I don't know. Seems like everywhere I look, there's podcasts being created. So I don't know. But yeah, just a massive thank you to everyone who's listening. But massive thank you to Vilma for not only encouraging me to do this show, but sending in all of these questions, which are going to form the rest of this show. I just was overwhelmed because she'd asked me, hey, what's your email? I'll send through some questions. And I thought they would just be like a few, and, you know, I'd maybe answer them and try my very best to expand on it, or maybe save them for another time. And when I do have like a bigger audience, and maybe I could get more interaction. What I was not expecting was an email with 17 questions, all of which are very ones that get you thinking. And I don't even know if I'm going to get through all of them today, but I would certainly do my best to go through all of these and give meaningful answers. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you, Vilma, for listening to this show, for all your support with the show. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for all these questions. So here we go. Number 1, in the 2 years you have been doing the podcast, what do you think you've gained from it? Okay, well, I think I've touched on this a little bit so far, but mostly I think I've gained more confidence in making conversations. I can be quite shy sometimes in real life. You know, I have to be comfortable, and sometimes my social anxiety just hits me out of nowhere. Most of the time I'm fine. If you see me in public, I'm pretty easygoing, but occasionally I can get a bit like, you know, cagey or uncomfortable, and I try my best to fight it, but, you know, anxiety, sucks sometimes. But this podcast has really helped with that, because it's meant that I've kind of eased back on it now, and I try to listen more than I speak. You know, I prefer to listen to people, and I think that does come from the show. Other than that, I think it's made me more outgoing and willing to take risks, because there's been quite a few times when I've reached out to people on this show to appear on the show, and I've been unsuccessful in many cases. I've been rejected. I've had people do all sorts of things. Like, I've had so many no-shows on this show for no reason. People just decide they don't want to be on the show, and it's like, okay, that's that, I guess. And it happens all the time, and anyone that's a podcaster listening will know exactly what I mean. I don't know how many exactly, but I know it's in the double digits. But it's just part of podcasting. That's just what it is. But I digress. What was my point with that? I mean, you just kind of have to, like, keep going, I suppose, and have confidence in yourself to be willing to reach out to people and fall, pardon my language, flat on your ass. You know, sometimes people are not going to take you seriously. There's been people who I knew either from childhood or I knew from real life, and they've since become successful. And, you know, I reached out to them about appearing on the show, and it seemed like it was going to happen. And then I don't know, they just aren't interested anymore. But they didn't tell me that. You know, I just have to learn that by seeing that they're just essentially ignoring me, or I don't know. There's been people that have blocked me on social media because they didn't want to be on the show, which perplexed me because, I mean, I try to be as professional as possible. Like literally, if I book a show with you, if it's got to the point where you're going to appear on the show, then, you know, all I'm going to send you is an email reminder of the day and be like, hey, you ready to go? But there's been a lot of instances, as I say, where I'm trying to negotiate, like getting someone on the show, and then they just, you know, change their mind, I guess, but never bother to tell me. And it sucks. And sometimes I wonder if it's a product of, you know, people becoming famous and then, you know, it goes to their head. It could just be genuinely forgetting. And hey, this isn't me like having a go at people, you know. I mean, I don't know. That's the thing in these instances. I don't know. I'm assuming, but I don't know that that's the case because they've not said anything to me. But, you know, you see people's social media, what they're doing on social media, and then you see how they're either interacting with you or not interacting with you, and you kind of put two and two together in those instances. And yeah, it kind of brings me to the point about how people say sometimes, like, why haven't you reached out to celebrities? I have, and I've mostly just had like a negative experience with that, unfortunately, because people aren't really interested unless you're somebody. That's not true for everyone. Everyone that's been on the show, regardless of who they are, and there's been quite a few instances where people have appeared on the show and they have like a big online following, or they're really successful in their own right. And I'm scratching my head why they'd want to appear on a show like mine, which has very few listeners, followers, not much reach, you know. I mean, I can offer you a good interview. I can certainly give you a good show, and I'll do my very best to make sure it's the best that it can be. But I can't guarantee that you being on this show will help you get anywhere. But at the same time, you know, it's not why I do the show. I don't do the show to get like loads of hits or to get loads of followers or anything like that. I do the show because I've always wanted to do a podcast, and I like interviewing people and I like learning from them. And I love this process. When I started, you know, of course, yeah, I was doing this as like one of many things to try and, I suppose, advance my chances of getting somewhere with my goals in life. And, you know, everything I do is to further my chances of, you know, becoming an actor, becoming a voice actor, becoming a successful podcaster, maybe getting into TV, maybe getting to travel the world. I've got a lot of different goals in life. And things like doing the podcast or TikTok or whatever help me to reach people. But nothing is guaranteed. And that's okay, because I love to do this. So I think, yeah, enjoyment, confidence to reach out to people, even if I almost think they might say no or they might ignore me. It's okay. Try. Just try. What do you have to lose? Nothing. And that whole thing of being bold and just reaching out to people, I've tried to transition that into everything else that I do. So I always try, you know, I'll apply for acting gigs even if I don't have the experience or, you know, whatever, or I don't know. I just try things even if I know I'm going to suck at them, because just why not? Like, what do I really have to lose? You know? So I think those are the main things that I think I've gained from doing this show. Yeah, let's move on to question 2. What makes a successful interview in your opinion? Gosh. I think that honestly depends on what type of interview you're trying to do. Because I've seen lots of different interview styles. I've been on a lot of different people's shows and experienced different types of interviews. Obviously, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't really call it research, but you see clips online of like chat shows and all these things. And I do pay attention to various different people's types of interviews. And I try to apply anything that I learn to my own kind of interviewing skills, if you like. But I think in general, a successful interview involves really giving your guests enough time to speak and to think. Don't try not to ask like leading questions or to like give them the answers, so to speak. Like try to have like open questions, or if you are going to lead them with something, just give them like an example, but then really push on like, well, what's your opinion? What do you think? How do you feel about this? Like I try very hard to try and get people to say how they feel rather than, I never ask like yes or no questions, really, rarely ever. Unless it's just a lot of the time, if I'm going to ask like a yes or no question, it's because I have other questions lined up, and it's just to understand like, okay, if I ask them this will mean that I ask them this, and this. If not, then maybe move on, or maybe ask them something different, But yeah, I think those are the main things that make for a successful interview. That, and I don't know if I said it before, but just sitting and really listening to what your guest has to say. And this is just a life skill in general, is being able to kind of sit and hear what the guest is saying, or to hear what the person is saying. And I'm not talking about the words, I mentioned it earlier, like the intent of what they mean, what their heart is trying to tell you. And not every guest is going to open up to you in that way, but for the ones that do, you have to try and connect with them on that level. And I think that is a real key aspect of a successful interview. But again, that's just my approach. There's many different approaches, and it really depends on your goals. My goals are to make my guests feel comfortable, try to get my guests to share as many stories as possible, and to just make them feel comfortable so that, they feel more inclined to open up, and they have a good time. And yeah, there's no agenda with my show. I'm not trying to catch anybody out. I'm not trying to get juicy gossip or dish and dirt or anything like that. Some people have asked me, like, why don't you ask controversial questions? Because I'm not looking for controversy. I'm looking to share stories and create something positive, something that maybe people will walk away and feel inspired after having, listened to the show. Anyway, hope that answers your question. Number 3, what would you like to ideally achieve still as far as the podcast is concerned? Well, there's a lot of things I'd like to achieve. I think probably the biggest is to get sponsors. At this point, it's not really about making money. It's more about kind of like solidifying that the podcast is worthy of getting sponsors. That's kind of more where my mindset is at this point. But, of course, I would love to be able to make a living from this. I mean, gosh, imagine being able to do this podcast for a living. That would be amazing. Other goals, I want to just keep the show going, get to 200 episodes, get to 500, get to 1,000, whatever, get to 5 years. These are all like goals I'd like to achieve with it. I would love to be able to build, ultimate fantasy, build my own studio, podcast studio, and just have like a hub that people could travel to. And I think that then I would be able to mix it up. So I could create a space that I'm comfortable being in and that my guests are comfortable being in and would travel to, but also, offering the option of, hey, we can still do a Zoom call or whatever. I like keeping my show varied, and I like being able to have people from around the world, and I would love to have a physical show and, you know, improve the quality of all this, have like state of the art cameras, good lighting, the best microphones money can buy, you know, all that jazz. There's a lot of things I still want to achieve with the podcast, but, you know, just keep it going, really, is in my head. Just keep trying. Number 4, what is one piece of advice or story or experience that has stayed with you after interviewing so many guests with diverse backgrounds and unique life stories? Oh my gosh. Oh, that's hard. There's so many. This is a bit of a cop-out answer because I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but I think one thing, which is kind of a lesson that I keep learning, or I'm reminded of, is through listening to all of my guests, particularly the ones who've been through like real hardships in life, really difficult things in life. An example actually comes to mind, actually. When I had a pretty recent guest on the show, Tessa Greenspan, she spoke about how, you know, her supermarket business went bankrupt and she, you know, she'd been betrayed and people had stolen her money and she just had to work from scratch and just build it all up again. And she's got to the point where she made tens of millions of dollars and, you know, travels the world and does all this, but it came through hard work and grit and determination. And I think the most amazing aspect of that inspired me was her attitude, her positive attitude, like how she got through that. And she was really refreshingly honest about that. You know, she said that, of course, there's low moments and, you know, you get sad and you feel like you want to pack it in, but you just keep trying, you keep going. And that's the same thing I say to all my, you know, my listeners on the show and on my TikTok lives and whatnot, is that you just have to keep going, especially on those dark days. Just remember that, you know, you'll go to bed, you'll wake up the next day and the sun will still be shining and you'll be alive and it's another opportunity. And life is a series of good and bad moments, and bad moments don't always last. And, you know, it's just part of the journey, isn't it? Just keep going, keep trying. That's my key takeaway whenever I have a guest on the show and they inspire me, and everyone inspires me that comes on the show in different ways. But that's the key takeaway every single time. And sometimes I'll be sitting there and, you know, there's been times when I've had a terrible week or a terrible day and I have that person on my show and suddenly, you know, I don't feel so low anymore. And I'm reminded of like, hey, I'm very lucky to be able to do this. And I love doing this and I want to keep doing this. And thank you for the opportunity to do this. And thank you for listening, because without you guys, you know, I said it before, but without you guys, there would be no show. And that would be a real demotivator, like having no one listening. Like there's a few people listening and you guys, you motivate me to keep going and keep delivering. And hopefully as we keep going, each and every show is better than the last, and you're enjoying it and staying on this journey here with me. Let's keep going. All right. Gosh, there's so many questions. I'm so grateful. This is amazing. What is the biggest life lesson you've learned so far? Gosh, yeah. So for those who've never, okay, yeah. What's the biggest life lesson and what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? This is funny. A few shows that I've been on, like other shows, they've asked me these questions and I always pop because these are the questions that I ask my guests. And I think they're really difficult because they ask you to isolate specific advice and lessons in that moment. And there's so much you've learned. And, you know, my main goal is to just find stuff that resonates with that person, you know, either in that moment or in life in general. But with me, oh gosh, best advice would be, off the top of my head, my dad once said to me, you are your own best friend. And so what he meant by that is, you know, you know yourself better than anyone else. You're with yourself from birth to death. You are your own best friend. You know yourself better than anyone. And, you know, you are always there for yourself. You can trust yourself. You can always trust yourself, hopefully, And that's always kind of stuck with me. There's been other advice, people give you advice all the time. Variety is the spice of life. That's a big one. Just being yourself, stuff like that. Life lessons, I mean, there isn't a single one, just like with the advice. And I think it changes in the moment, what becomes, because sometimes you'll learn things, but they won't become apparent or relevant until later on. And so I often feel like we're never really learning, we're rediscovering in a sense. Of course we're learning, but you know what I mean? Like we're rediscovering stuff. Especially, we've probably heard every quote there is, you've heard every cliche quote, but sometimes you see it and it resonates with you in that moment because you're going through something in life. And it's like, right, yeah, of course. This lesson, yeah, I've seen this before, but it makes sense now. Like, of course, this is how it is. Oh, biggest life lesson. I'll share a few. Right. I think when it comes to regrets, and I've had a few, but I do kind of believe everything happens for a reason. How I try to live my life now is to have as few regrets as possible. I try to take advantage of every single opportunity I can get and try not to be afraid to take risks and to take chances and just try to think about like what might be instead of like, oh, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen, like negative, bad stuff. Think about what could happen. Think about the positives. Think about the possibilities. Essentially being optimistic. There's other things like, I mentioned it a little bit before, but, being yourself is one of the most important things in life because it drives your life. You are who you are, and no one should be able to tell you how to live your own life. You know what's best for you. Don't get me wrong. It's always good to hear what other people around you have to say. And like, not everyone is out to get you. Some people are really trying to help you, but things have to resonate for you. You have to make your own understanding of things and, live your life for you. Be true to yourself. And another one, which is one I've more recently started to take on board, is to trust your gut, trust your instincts. I look at it like a bit of a cheat sheet, It's like a cheat code in a video game, infinite lives. I don't know. I just trust my gut and my instincts, and it never serves me wrong. It always, how I feel about something is always how it is. Maybe I'm crazy thinking that way, but I don't know. To me, that makes much more sense than listening to my brain, which always just seems to say, oh, I'm afraid, like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it's like, well, we got through X, Y, and Z. We'll get through this, And that's another final thing. Yeah. Just remember that whatever hardships or difficulties that you're going through right now in life, you'll get through it because you've been through arguably much worse. Or if you haven't, and you're going through something terrible and you've never dealt with it before, you will get through it and you'll be stronger for it. It's the strength of the human spirit. We can do anything. Hang in there and keep going. Why should somebody listen to the Christian Reeve podcast? I think to be inspired, to be motivated, to be reminded why life is worth living. Maybe that's a bit over the top, but I don't know. Like I said before, all these guests that I've had on the show are really, truly amazing people. And I'm honored to be able to talk to all of them and have them on the show. And, for them to share their stories and their experiences. And, they're not always positive. Sometimes they're very negative, like powerful, traumatic experiences. And it's not easy for them to share it, but they're brave and they do so. And I think I'm so proud that we're able to showcase that and show people listening or watching that, you know, you're not alone in this life that we're all living. You know, other people have achieved amazing feats or you know, got through difficult times, and they're just like you. They're no different to you. Sure, their lives might be different, different circumstances, whatever, but they're just like you, and there's no reason that you can't. And again, it's, as I said before, why I keep doing the show, because I'm just inspired by these people, and I want to keep talking to them, and I want to keep bringing those conversations to you. And I've spoken in frustration on live streams before about one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, I want more people to listen is because I want more people to hear and see these conversations and be inspired by them. And who knows what fantastic things they could do in their lives as a result of hearing whatever advice someone on my show shared. You know, like, that's the way I like to think about it. Anyway, do you think that any topic and any guest could make for interesting conversation? Ooh, great question. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny as well. I remember one guy came on my show, and just before he came on the show, he said, oh, you know, I'm a bit worried, like, maybe I won't be as interesting as the rest of your guests. And I just stopped him and said, like, listen, every person is interesting. Everyone has something to say. You know, conversations are conversations. As long as we're both there in it and we want to be there and we're both interested in hearing what each other has to say, it'll be a great conversation. And that's the way I look at it, you know. And also, everyone's interests are different. There's been topics, you know, people I've had on the show where I'm not as interested as I would be talking about other things, but I'm still there for it. I'm there to learn. You know, in an instance where I don't have as much interest or I don't know as much, I sit there and I know my role and I listen. You know, whereas if it's something like, I don't know, wrestling, I'll be more inclined to sort of hop in there and share my thoughts and opinions on that thing because I know more about that. But that doesn't change the fact that I want to hear what my guest has to say, and I try to make that the focal point. But yeah, I do think that any topic and any guest can make for interesting conversation. To be honest, every single show where I have a guest on, it's a challenge. And every time I do a topic or a discussion-based episode, it's a challenge. It's always a challenge. It always will be challenging. And I love that about life. I love anything that's a challenge. You know, it just forces you to be better. And, you know, sometimes you fall over and you make mistakes, but then you get back up and you keep going, you know. What are 3 qualities a good podcaster should have, in your opinion? Okay. Probably going to repeat some stuff, but yeah. Being a good listener. I think being patient, because it's a marathon, not a race. If you haven't got the views that you wanted in 5 episodes, 20 episodes, ooh, squeaky chair, 50 episodes, you know, it might not come straight away. I mean, crikey, I've been doing this show now for 2 years and I'm still trying to get somewhere with it, you know. And I've had some people tell me, oh, it takes at least 3 years and then you break out. Some people say like, oh, you can do a show for like 5-10 years and you'll never get anywhere. And, you know, I hear all sorts of things. So I think patience is very important, you know, just keep going. And consistency, keep releasing, stick to a schedule. You know, I'm going to add a few more. Sorry, I know it was 3 qualities, but I'll add to this. I think having a clear structure for what you want to do, a clear plan for what you want to do for your show, and sticking to that schedule are 2 really important aspects to this. So if you are doing a show and you want to do it like once a week, stick to that. Release an episode once a week. If you promise to your guests, your listeners, that you're going to release every Wednesday, then do that and stick to that and don't falter and don't miss a week. Because the problem is when you miss episodes as well, like you get demotivated. I've had times where I've missed weeks, and sometimes it happens because I've had no shows. Other times it happens because I just didn't have any guests. But you know what I should have done in those instances? I should have, done a discussion episode. I have a bank of topics that are raring to go, but I've not, done them. And luckily, I've been so lucky as to have been busy with just a constant overflow of guests. But there might be times when that doesn't happen, and you're forced to be creative with your show and look elsewhere, or maybe even reach out to more people. And yeah, I mean, podcast, there's a lot of work. If you want to do a podcast, you have to accept that there's going to be a lot of work involved, and you might not get the results you want, but it's all part of it. Anything you want to do in life, you got to put the work in. A podcast is no different. Is sponsorship essential for the success of a podcast? I don't know, because I've never been sponsored, but I think it depends on two things. I think it depends, firstly, on what you define as success for a podcast. And secondly, I suppose it depends on the individual goals of that podcast. If you look at a show like Joe Rogan's podcast, or the Diary of a CEO, or all those wrestling podcasts that I'm into, like 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff, or Something to Wrestle With, I mean, some shows opt to just kind of go for having, their own sponsor, shilling their own products or whatever, their own brand, or sometimes they'll have several sponsors. As I said earlier in this show, I mean, I think that having a sponsor is kind of like a mark of your show being somewhat reputable, but at the same time, like, I don't think you have to have it necessarily to be successful. I mean, I guess there's probably podcasts out there that, for instance, make money just through listens, through like Anchor or through YouTube or whatever. I think sponsorship should be something that all podcasters aim for, but at the same time, as I said before, there's different goals. Sometimes people do podcasts with no thought about making money or anything from it. They just want to kind of, talk about like history and capture something, or they do it just for fun, or they do it to kind of as a kind of, I don't know, a way of, hello housemate, a way of like tracking something, kind of like a diary, I suppose, an audio diary, so to speak. And that's a different purpose. Yeah, I really don't know. I really don't know. If I never got a sponsor, but let's say I reached like 50 people every single show, or I had like 20 dedicated listeners every single time, I would regard that as a success. I mean, I already think that on a small scale, the podcast is successful because there's a handful of people listening and watching, and you keep listening and watching, and that is a success in of itself. So I really think that how you look at things is integral in that particular question. But yeah, I mean, for some people it's a passion, for others it's work, for others it's both. For me, I would love to be able to make money from this. I would love to be able to get sponsors from this, but hello, slammy door. It wouldn't be the end of the world if I didn't either. And there's the third one. You can hear all the doors slamming in this house. You can never not hear them. All right, let's move on. In today's society, where everyone is so busy and always on the go, do you think that the duration of a podcast episode could act as a deterrent, interesting, and thus might someone not choose to listen to a specific episode thinking that it is too long? Okay, wow. I kind of covered part of this earlier, I know this is kind of asking a few things, but I mean, firstly, I think you have to look at what type of content this is. Some people love to read. Some people hate to read. Some people love to listen to podcasts. Some people hate to or aren't interested. I know that there's many people that, check out my content, let's say on TikTok, that's never more than like 30 seconds long, generally, but they probably would never check out my podcast. Maybe vice versa. Maybe there's people that check out my podcast that would never look at the short form content. To me, it's just different types of content. I enjoy making both. But as far as people listening or watching, I mean, I think everything kind of has its audience, I know numbers wise, podcasts are still huge. There's still millions of people that listen to podcasts. I think there always will be a market for it, to be honest. So that's one aspect to it. I think it's just like a catered to a specific audience. Damn, that door is loud. I'm gonna have a word with my housemate after this. Stop ruining my 2-year podcast. But I'm not gonna have a word with him. How would he know? How would he know? How would he know? As far as the other part of this question, I mean, maybe the duration could make a difference. I definitely have been paying much more attention to how long the episodes are, because, I used to never pay attention to that. Sometimes they'd be like 2 hours long and I'd be like, yeah, that's great. Or, I want to do 3 hours, but it is a real slog to get through something like that. And one of the pieces of feedback I actually got from people was that, they wouldn't listen to the podcast in one sitting because it was too long. They'd listen to it in like several sittings. And I don't know if necessarily that affects numbers, but I certainly think that it might put people off, maybe. But then you have to ask yourself, like, who is listening to the podcast? Where are they listening? How are they listening? If you've got a long drive, it's not a problem. Probably the longer, the better, I try to aim for anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half. 45 minutes is like my absolute minimum. If it's shorter than that, I don't think it's long enough. But that's just my personal opinion. But yeah, I do think that you got to call it somewhere. But then again, it depends. There's podcasts that I listen to that are, say, 3-4 hours long, but there's a reason for that. Those people don't release content anywhere else. And when they do, people are clamoring to listen to that. But then they do like clips online that are like sometimes podcast length in of themselves, like 40-minute clips or whatever. And they get more listens and follows those accounts than the actual podcast does. So, it's interesting to me, actually. I thought that my clips would take off. I thought that, that would be like huge for me, but it's never really gotten me anywhere. I've had a few clips that have had hundreds of thousands of views, luckily, but most of them struggle to get any views. The ones that are on my main accounts online get a bit more, but I think a lot of it's just passing kind of like interest, and occasionally people will, make comments and stuff like that. But I don't think that those people are necessarily invested in listening to a full podcast. I think they're more kind of like, oh, that's a cool clip, or oh, that relates to me, or whatever. And because I mean, it's fine. Like you often see like podcast clips in your timeline on various different platforms, don't you? And sometimes they can be really inspiring, or sometimes they might be interesting. I mean, I suppose, and maybe I'm an exception to the rule. I don't know, but for me, sometimes if I see clips that are good enough, that really are inspiring, it will make me want to listen to the full episode. Like, for instance, I remember that's how I discovered the Diary of a CEO podcast. Now, I'm not like a regular listener, but I remember seeing a few clips of the episode with Jimmy Carr, and I'm a big fan of Jimmy Carr's work anyway. But I think the interesting thing was that there were a few clips. They were no longer than maybe a minute long, and they were really inspiring. And Jimmy Carr was talking in a way that was kind of out of character for his general persona. He was being very real with himself, very bare bones honest on this show. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I saw another clip, and then another, I think I saw 3 in total. And then by that point I was sold and I had to go check out the episode. And that's always my hope when I release clips, is like, oh, maybe, if I release these, maybe someone will see these clips, be like, love the clips and be like, oh, I have to go check this podcast out, this particular episode. But it's a gamble every time. I try to pick out, the most interesting clips, but it's all subjective. I'm doing it all on my own, and I have no idea if those are the most interesting ones. I mean, there are some that I always do, like, biggest life lesson, best advice. I suppose that's just part of my show and its brand. But a lot of the other clips, they're just what I think might be interesting to people listening, and that's a gamble each and every time. Anyway, oh gosh, we've got a few more questions left. Who are 3 people you would love to ideally interview in the future, and why? Oh gosh, I don't know. There's loads of people I'd love to interview. So I might have to skip this question, because I love having like anyone on the show, as long as they're willing to have a conversation and not just try and plug themselves, as long as they're invested and want to have a good conversation and want to create good content, but also, kind of go with the point of the show, which is to share your stories, to share who you are and what you're about, and to have a conversation about that. And I should also add as well, it's not just people's life stories or whatever. If you've got, and this accounts for anyone listening, if you've got like a particular topic that you want to talk about, bring that, and we can go through that, because I always sit down and do lots of research heading into a show. So if it's on a specific topic that you want to talk about with me, we can make that happen, so that's another element to it. But anyway, sorry, I'm going to skip that one, so I hope you understand. Is there anything you would hesitate to ask or never ask a guest, and why? This is a great question. So every time I do a show, without fail, before I'm about to record, I will ask the guest, is there anything off limits or anything you're uncomfortable talking about? Now, I've already done my research on my guests. Sometimes they're more forthcoming and they give me lots of information about themselves, sometimes very personal stuff, but that happens to be part of their brand. Like, they're open and they share these things. But some of them, maybe they shared it in confidence to kind of build up an idea of who they are, but maybe they don't want to talk about that stuff. And other people are surprised sometimes with things they don't want to talk about. Whenever I ask them that question, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about not having an agenda and not making people feel uncomfortable. I want people to feel comfortable. And I want them to know that, if there's particular things they don't wish to discuss, either because they're triggering or traumatic or whatever the case may be, they don't have to. And we just won't go there. So I suppose the answer to the question is yes, but those are the reasons, is to make my guests feel comfortable and safe, and, realize that there's no agenda here. I'm just trying to have a good time. I want them to have a good time. So that's something I do. A few more questions left. Crikey. How long has this been going? Oh, wow. We've already reached an hour. There you go. Thank you so much, Vilma. You've made the show. How different would the show be if you could interview your guests in person in a studio instead of online? What do you think this would add to the show? Well, great question. These are fantastic questions. I think the vibe might be a little bit different, because it's always a bit different when you're in person, because you can kind of feel the other person's vibe, their energy, whatever. So there's that aspect to it. I feel like in some instances, maybe it would just be the same. In some, maybe some of the more shy, introverted guests might not feel as comfortable if they have to be in this, this studio of mine, as opposed to like in their own home. So I think that could change the types of conversations you'd have with people, in terms of certain people not feeling as comfortable. But in general, what do I think would add? Would add to the show? Would this add to the show? I certainly do think it would. Again, just like the sponsorship point, I think it would add reputability. It would make the show more reputable, I think, by having a fixed location to work from. I think it would help with finding more guests. Certainly, I think it might help with finding quote unquote more high profile guests. But I think like that would be more to do with like if I would sign a contract, let's say with like an agency or podcasting, what do they call them? I can't remember the name. Network, that's the one. That would be more as a product of that, as opposed to actually just having a physical location. But every big show that you can think of has their own studio. They just do. Not everyone, all the wrestling ones that I listen to are actually just Zoom calls, but that's just by design, so it's not the be all end all. For me, it's a dream of mine, but it wouldn't be the be all end all for me. I just want to keep the show going and keep growing, keep persevering with it. But yeah, I think it would add something to the show. I think it would add, as I say, credibility and just a new element, I think. But again, as I said before, because I have people from around the world, you can't expect everyone to hop on a plane and come see you. I think a lot of the show would still be Zoom and stuff like that. But certainly, if I had like UK guests, since I'm based in the UK right now, that would be interesting maybe for them. Maybe certain people would prefer to be in person. Who knows? Is there a question you wish you could have asked the guest but didn't? Nothing that immediately comes to mind. I think there's been times when we got so caught up in, the conversation that we were having that we didn't have time to ask the rest of the questions. But to be honest, those are the best shows when you just kind of throw the script out the window. And a lot of the time that is the case, because that's my aim. I want to have conversations like that. I don't want to, just stick to a script. I hate that idea. But sure. But I don't think there's ever been anyone like any specific question where I'm like, oh my God, that's completely ruined it. Why didn't I think of that? So, as I say, like, if there was like a specific question I had to ask them, I would just make sure that's one of the first questions I ask them, But yeah, I suppose I've been lucky on that front. Would you ever like to do a similar style interview show on TV with a live audience or live on the radio? I could see live on the radio working. I've had a few comments over the past year or so saying that people have heard my voice and thought it would be good for radio. And I was very flattered to hear that. And I would love to do radio. That would be amazing. I'd probably have to change a few things as far as the setup is concerned, but I could make it work somehow. But with TV with a live audience, I think it really depends, because again, the nature of it changes. Like I hate all these talk shows in America, for example, because it's just about it's a big old farce. It's a big old just like it's entertainment. They're not really there to do like a really good interview. They're just kind of mucking around. There's a few exceptions to that rule. But a lot of the time it's just, mucking around. Like the only person I can really think of that really does it well, that I really adore, is Graham Norton. I think he does an excellent job because his show is kind of a mixture of all of the above. He'll ask them serious questions. He'll advertise their stuff. He'll ask them fun stuff. He'll get good stories out of them, which is brilliant. That's what you want. You want to see those stars talking about relatable things or sharing crazy stories or showing that they're human. And he gets that out of them. I mean, part of even just the physical setup of that show is brilliant because they're on a sofa with like no armrests or anything, where they kind of have to sit upright like that. So they're kind of already uncomfortable, but he makes them comfortable and he gets them all involved, and he doesn't like, he makes it silly, but he makes sure that they feel comfortable. He makes sure that they understand that it's just fun, and he's not mocking them, or he's not trying to, make them look ridiculous. He's just having fun, and they're having fun. And, like, people love to appear on the show, apparently in the industry, in like the acting industries and TV industries, like, apparently they always seek to be on his show. And I can see why. He's fantastic at what he does. If I could do something like that, then sure. But I mean, he's the master. Do you know what I mean? And I'm a long form guy as well. Like, someone like Graham Norton is very witty and quick, and that's not really me. I can sometimes do that, but I'm more like, sit down, do your research, come prepared, and do like a long form thing. I think that's why I might be better for something like radio. But I'm open to it with TV. It really depends what the format would be. So I'm open to it, but I think it would be very different in terms of vibe from what we're doing here on the show. And if I would do something like that, chances are I would keep doing the podcast separately, and it'd just be its own thing. And then the TV show would just be like a highly condensed version. I don't know. I'd have to see what they were, proposing. But radio really does sound very appealing. It'd be interesting to see what. Yeah, I've also thought about not just talk radio, but also I love music, as you guys know. I'm a musician, and one of the things I've noticed that's been happening a lot over the past 2 years is when I do these TikTok lives, random bands will get in touch with me and be like, "Hey, what about this song? Would you check out this song?" And I'll check it out, and it's always awesome. And you can shine a spotlight on them and be like, "Hey, this is a good band you can check out." And sometimes I'll have, people's bands on the show, or members of bands, to promote them and stuff. But I always listen to their music ahead of time, to prepare, and also just because I like music. And I've discovered some good bands through that as well. So it'd be cool to actually do like a sort of music show that was a combination of talk, radio, and music. That would be almost the ultimate dream, I think. But yeah. Final question. Wow. What can someone gain from listening to podcasts, and why have podcasts become so popular in recent years? Gosh. Well, I like to think of myself as somewhat of a podcasting historian of sorts, because I've been fascinated with podcasts ever since I heard some of the very first ones made by Ricky Gervais and his team. I think that show was the show that made me want to do a podcast. And that was back in the 2000s, way before I ever could have envisioned doing something like that. It was only really at uni that I started actually toying with the idea. But that was the initial inspiration point, if you like. And I believe that podcasts have been done way before that too. But after that show, then it became like huge. Then it became this like a massive mainstream thing, and suddenly everyone was doing them. I think, this is okay. I'll try and answer the second part of this first, then go back to the first part. So I think the reason why podcasts have become so popular is a combination of things. I think one, it's a really easy thing to like set up. You don't need much to set up a podcast, but at the same time, it is a lot of hard work. But, if you're just setting up a podcast right now, bare bones, all you need is a mic. You could probably even just do it with just a mic initially. That's how I started. And then you go from there, and you slowly get better equipment over time. And you, most importantly, work on your content and make it better. That's at least from the podcasting side. As far as the listener viewer side, I think that it's really interesting. And I think it's the same reason that audiobooks are successful as well, is because not everybody is into like reading or watching videos as being like their main source of entertainment. Like for some people, it's auditory. It's hearing. And I always remember that with the podcast. As much as we have clips and we have a video version, most people that listen to this show listen to the audio version. And to be honest, I've scarcely actually sat down and listened to how the show sort of sounds when it's just auditory. I have, and it sounds normal. I mean, I hate the sound of my own voice, but it sounds passable, at least in the sense that like I'm okay with it. I should also explain, like, every time I put the show out, I'm proud of it because of my guest. I'm not proud of it because of me. I'm proud because of the guest I had, which means that I especially scrutinize episodes like this, where it's just me talking. I mean, I've been talking now for an hour and 17 minutes. It's just like, the point. I think it's just a specific type of thing that is appealing. It's an auditory thing that's appealing. I mean, I've listened to a lot of audiobooks over the years, and that's creates a picture in your head, and I think that there's something kind of comforting about listening to a podcast. Over the years, I would listen to podcasts, particularly in moments where I wasn't very happy, and it kind of felt like, I had friends in the room with me. And that's kind of what I've tried to recreate with this show, and why it's so laid back, and why it is just kind of bare bones and, no cuts, just not trying to be perfect. I'm not trying to be perfect. I don't want the show to sound perfect. I want it to sound imperfect, because I want to recapture that magic that I heard all those years ago when I was listening to podcasts for the first time. That kind of imagining yourself, sitting there in the room with the two people having the conversation, and you're just listening, and you're not contributing, you're just listening. I like that. I can think of so many times in my life where I've been sitting and listening to some people have a conversation, and it's a really interesting conversation, and I'm just absorbing it. And that's what I'm trying to recreate with this. But I hope that kind of answers maybe why podcasts have become popular. I mean, I think it's just a different medium as well. There's always going to be new mediums that come and go. It seems that podcasts are a bit of a staple that have remained. Maybe because there's just more money in podcasts. Maybe that's what it is. I mean, you see like the deal that Joe Rogan cut for, I think it was 100 million? And then I've seen other podcasts like in the UK, the Happy Hour podcast, and they went from doing like a YouTube podcast where they were just talking YouTube drama to having, major film stars and actors and all sorts of musicians on their show. So props to them. Once you've got a bit of money or sponsors or whatever, sky's the limit as far as what you can do with the show. But maybe it's just that it's a different type of medium that allows a lot more. There's a lot more possibilities, I think, with podcasts. Because going back to the point about interviews, a lot of the time, if you have like an actor appear on like a chat show, you know what to expect. You're going to get like maybe 10, 15 minutes of that guest, and because there's going to be other guests on the show, and you get a bit of fun from them. Maybe they'll ask a few questions. They might ask one controversial question. But I suppose the thing you're looking for is anything controversial going to happen? Are they going to walk off on, are they going to be annoyed by a question? Are they going to be really fun? Maybe that's the appeal of those shows. But as far as say like an actor or a musician appearing on a podcast, I mean, that's an hour, maybe 2 hours of uninterrupted conversation where anything could happen, and we've seen it time and time again where people have been doing a show and it was long, an hour and a half, but like a few clips have been taken from that and they've gone viral, So I think it's just an interesting medium that has a lot of possibilities. So maybe it's that, but yeah, I don't know. And the other part of the question, what can someone gain from listening to podcasts? Well, a lot, really. I mean, I suppose it depends on what topics you're interested in, but if there's a thing you're interested in, guess what? There's going to be a podcast on that topic. And I've seen a lot of interesting topics over the years that people have dedicated entire podcasts to and have really got some longevity out of in some cases. And it's amazing. It really is. and I suppose tying up this episode with a bow. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm so enamored with podcasting, especially with my show. Like, originally I was just going to do a wrestling podcast, and I got a bit of news about that, by the way. I'll save that for the end. Well, we are in the end in a minute. Wait, be patient. I decided, instead of doing just a wrestling only podcast, I wanted to do a show where I got to talk about anything. I wanted to be able to talk about any topic. I didn't want there to be rules or restrictions. And there still are a few. There's some certain topics I won't touch just because I don't want to. But, you know, and also a big part of it, as I mentioned before, is me trying to build a story as far as like, okay, this is what the show is. So now that I know that it's life stories and particular topics at length, in depth and stuff like that, now I know what to look for, you're saying guests, and also how to structure my show, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think with this podcast moving forward, I'll just keep doing what I've always done and just keep trying to learn and keep moving forward and go as I've been going for the past 2 years. Because I feel like the learning and the lessons have come naturally. You know, it's they've occurred through the process of doing, and that's my favorite way to learn, is to just do and learn that way. Learn by living, and that's what I've done with this show. And I like the fact that it's an open platform, an open format that makes for a lot of possibilities. And just quick news before I tie things up for good for this episode, the 2-year anniversary of the Christian Reeve Podcast. I am now, as of recording this right now, appearing weekly on a wrestling podcast, which has also been a side dream of mine, to finally be involved with a wrestling podcast. Now I am having to catch up on all of WWE and AEW every week, and there's a lot of TV to catch up with. But I'm now appearing on the Against the Mat podcast. You can find it on Spotify and not sure where else, but you can find it online. Search Against the Mat podcast, and I appear on it every single Monday. Or at least that's when I record it. And yeah, I have some controversial opinions sometimes about wrestling. So if you like wrestling, then go check it out. Anyway, bringing it back to this episode, 2 years, wrapping a bow on this 2-year anniversary podcast. Well, firstly, once again, massive thank you and shout out to Vilma for all these wonderful questions and for supporting the show and just being brilliant. Thank you so much. It means the world to me. Thank you to everyone that's ever listened to an episode of the podcast. Thank you to all the guests that have appeared on the show. Thank you to everyone that supported me just in general. And yeah, keep listening, keep watching the podcast. The best is yet to come. Thanks for listening, guys. Be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.